Picture the most powerful city on earth. Now fill it with a market so well hidden that no newspaper will name it, no minister will preach against it, and no policeman will touch it. Not because they don't know it exists, but because half of them are customers. Add fog so thick it sits on your tongue like wet wool. Add the particular kind of cold that lives inside charitable institutions, the kind that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the way nobody in that building is allowed to hold you. Add the smell of boiled cabbage and damp stone and the specific sourness of children who haven't been properly washed in 3 weeks because the hot water ration was cut again. A place where a girl could recite Bible verses perfectly in the morning and be sold before supper. That's London. Victorian London. 1880s. The London of empire, industry, of gaslight and Gladstone, of grand philanthropic societies with mahogany desks and brass letterheads, and annual dinners where wealthy men congratulate each other on saving the poor. That London. And the other one underneath it. We're going back tonight. Not as tourists staring at the gaslit streets. Not as social historians reading Booth's poverty maps. We're living it. One girl, one institution, one terrible year. Everything she would have seen, smelled, touched, and either survived or didn't. So, I make these history stories. I genuinely have no idea if you're listening to fall asleep, or if you're one of those people who lies awake at 3 a.m, wanting to know exactly how badly the Victorians could behave while simultaneously congratulating themselves on their moral superiority. Either way, honestly respect. Get comfortable. Pull something warm over yourself. Here we go. Your eyes open to grey. Not darkness. That would almost be better. Grey. The particular institutional grey of a high window set too far up the wall for you to see anything through it, except a rectangle of sky the colour of old dishwater. The kind of grey that says, this room was not designed for the comfort of the people inside it. It was designed for the management of them. For a moment, half a second, maybe less. You don't remember where you are. Then your nose does the remembering for you. The smell of St. Agatha's home for destitute girls hits you in layers, the way it always does when you've been asleep long enough to briefly forget it. First, carbolic soap. They wash the floors with it every morning, a thin solution that's mostly water and mostly theatre, and it sits in your nostrils like a chemical apology. The governor's visit on Thursdays. The floors get washed harder on Wednesdays. Under that, boiled linen. The sheets are boiled weekly in a copper vat in the laundry room. You know this because you have spent approximately 400 hours of your life standing over that copper vat, feeding sheets into it with a wooden paddle the size of a cricket bat, while steam makes your face feel like it's peeling off. Under that, the dormitory itself. 32 girls in a room designed charitably for 20. 32 sets of lungs breathing recycled air all night. 32 bodies on thin mattresses that were probably thin before you were born and are now simply geography, valleys and ridges worn into the horsehair by the shapes of all the girls who slept on them before you. And underneath all of that, underneath the carbolic and the linen and the breath, something sweet and slightly wrong that you've never been able to identify and have long since stopped trying. This is St. Agatha's Home for Destitute Girls, Lambeth, London. The year is 1885, and you are 11 years old. Your name is Eliza Marsh. You were 6 when they brought you here. You remember almost nothing about before, which is probably a mercy. You remember a room with a window that looked onto a yard. You remember someone's hands, You remember the specific sound of a door closing in a way that meant it was not going to open again. That's all. St. Agatha's has been your entire world for 5 years. The bell rings at 5:30. Not a gentle bell. There's nothing gentle about St. Agatha's. This is the iron bell that hangs above the kitchen passage, operated by Mrs. Grindle, who's been waking girls at 5:30 for going on 30 years, and has developed a technique that seems specifically engineered to prevent anyone from pretending they didn't hear it. She rings it twice, hard. Then she waits exactly 4 seconds. Then she rings it again. The 4 seconds are the worst part. 4 seconds where you're awake and you know what's coming, and it comes anyway. You are out of bed before the 3rd ring. This is not courage. This is simple mathematics. Girls who are last out of bed get the coldest water from the washing basin. In November, cold water from the St. Agatha's washing basins is the sort of cold that makes your hands ache all the way to the elbows. You have learned, over 5 years, through direct painful experiment, that there are small hierarchies inside large institutions, and the easiest ones to navigate are the physical ones. Be early. Be first to the basin. Be in your dress and apron before the second girl on your row has rubbed the sleep from her eyes. So you move. The floor is bare wood, cold enough to feel through your stockings. Your dress is folded on the chair beside your bed. Grey cotton, St. Agatha's grey. The same grey as every dress in this room. The same grey as the walls, as if the institution wanted you to understand from a very young age that you are not a person so much as a component. You pull it on. The buttons are at the back, which means you have to wait for Agnes Croft, whose bed is next to yours and who is already awake, already cooperative, because Agnes has also been here long enough to understand the cold water mathematics. She does your buttons, you do hers. This has been the morning arrangement for 3 years. You have never discussed it. The washing basins are in the hallway outside the dormitory. 6 basins for 32 girls. The water in them is changed, and here I want you to understand what changed means in this context. Twice a week. It is Wednesday. The water has been in the basin since Monday. It is the colour of very weak tea, and it smells of something mineral and slightly organic that you don't examine too closely. You splash it on your face. Your face wakes up the way it always does, unhappily and all at once, the cold registering through your skin like a small shock. There is a sliver of soap chained to the basin with a piece of wire, the way soap is always chained in places that don't trust the people living in them. You rub it between your palms, generating something that is technically leather if you're being generous, and wash your face and hands in the dim light of a single gas jet turned down to its lowest setting, because St. Agatha's is careful with its gas. St. Agatha's is careful with everything except the girls. Your hands are dry. They're always dry in November, cracked at the knuckles from the laundry work, from the cold, from the particular combination of too much soap and not enough fat. If you press your thumb into the crease between your fingers, there's a small bright sting that tells you a crack has opened overnight. You press harder for a second, almost involuntarily. Then you stop, because that is not something you're allowed to think about, which is perhaps why you do it. You dry your hands on the communal towel and put that thought away. Breakfast is at 6. The dining hall is a long room with tables arranged in rows and benches that are bolted to the floor. There are no individual chairs. There are no individual settings. There is bread, a thick slice each, from a loaf that has been cut into precise portions by Mrs. Grindle, who measures things the way she rings bells. with a precision that is the closest she gets to mercy. There is a cup of something warm that is sometimes oat porridge and sometimes hot water, flavoured with the ghost of oats past. Today is Oat Ghost Day. You sit at your usual bench. Agnes sits beside you. Across from you is Mary Hutchins, who is 14 and has been here since she was 3, and who is therefore the closest thing to a veteran that St. Agatha's has. Mary knows things. She knows which of the governesses will look the other way at certain small rules, and which ones will report you for breathing incorrectly. She knows which cupboards are left unlocked on Sundays. She knows the sound of different footsteps in the hallway and what each set means. Mary Hutchins, in another life, would have made a very good spy. Selections today, she says. She doesn't say it loudly. She says it at a volume precisely calibrated for the distance between your two faces, a volume that doesn't carry to the governess at the end of the room. You feel something move in your stomach. That is not hunger. Selection. Let me explain selection, because this is the part that the Victorian philanthropists, the ones with the mahogany desks and the brass letterheads, were most proud of. And I need you to understand what it actually was before I tell you what it looked like. Every so often St. Agatha's received visitors, ladies, mostly, sometimes accompanied by gentlemen, representatives of households, representatives of establishments, sometimes simply representatives of themselves. They came to select girls for placement. That's the word they used. Placement. As in, we are placing you somewhere. We are finding you a situation. We are setting you up in life. The Victorian charitable system had decided, with the absolute confidence of people who have never been hungry, that the correct solution to destitute children was to put them to work. Not education, not primarily. Work. Useful work. Domestic service mostly. Girls went into service, boys went into trades. The respectable version of this was real, and it worked tolerably well. A girl would go into a good household, learn to clean and cook and mend, earn a small wage, and eventually, with luck and virtue and the grace of God and at least one decent employer, she might end up as a housekeeper somewhere, or married to a decent man, or at the very minimum not dead in a ditch. This happened. I'm not telling you it didn't. But here is the thing about systems. When you build a pipeline for moving vulnerable people from one place to another, and when you give that pipeline the language of charity and the legal cover of employment, you create something else as well. You create the most efficient possible mechanism for the people who want to exploit those vulnerable people. You make it easy. You make it official. You make it so that no one has to sneak. The girl doesn't go missing in the night. She leaves in the daytime through the front door signed over by a matron in a ledger, waved off by other girls who assume she's lucky. She is just placed. You know about this because Mary told you. Mary told you approximately 8 months ago on a Sunday afternoon when the governesses were at church, and the institution entered one of its rare phases of relative unsupervision. She told you in the particular way that people in institutions share dangerous information, quietly, quickly, without looking at the person they're telling, as if the information is a hot coal that can only be passed, not held. Some of them are good, Mary said. The placements. There are proper households, proper service. And some of them aren't, he said. Some of them aren't. You knew this already in the way you know things you haven't been told, in your body, in the way certain visitors looked at certain girls, in the way Mrs. Fordham, the matron, sometimes got quieter and more careful before a selection day, as if she had decided not to know something that she very probably did know. Mary is being selected today. Her 14th birthday was last week. Girls of 14 are the most popular selections. Old enough to be useful, the records say. Old enough, the records don't say, for other things as well. The selection happens in the receiving room after morning prayers. The receiving room is where St. Agatha's presents its best face to the outside world. It is the one room in the institution that has curtains, actual curtains, red ones with a slight pattern, slightly faded but unambiguously present. There is a rug on the floor. There are chairs that have cushions. There is a small fire that burns consistently rather than sporadically, because this room is for visitors. You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be in the laundry. You're in the laundry. Technically, you're standing at the far end of the passage that runs between the laundry and the back of the receiving room, in a narrow section where a door was bricked over some years ago but incompletely, leaving a gap at the bottom of about 2 inches. You discovered this gap 6 months ago. You have not told anyone about it. Through it, you can hear the receiving room. You can smell it too through that gap. It smells of coal fire and something floral. A woman's perfume, something expensive, something that doesn't belong here. And underneath it, the same institutional smell that soaks into everything at St. Agatha's, as if the building is trying to mark everything it touches. There are 2 visitors, today. One is a woman you've seen before, Mrs. Tremaine. She represents a domestic employment agency on the Strand. She comes to St. Agatha's every few months. She's plump and efficiently dressed and speaks in a particular way. Fast, confident, final. That reminds you of an auctioneer, though you've only seen auctioneers once from a distance, at a sale of furniture from a bankrupt house on the street near St. Agatha's. The other is a man you don't recognise. He is tall, well-dressed in a slightly overworked way, the way that people dress when they want to be taken for more than they are. He has a hat he hasn't removed. This is notable. Men who visit charitable institutions for girls usually remove their hats. It is a performance of respect for the institution. A man who keeps his hat on has decided the performance isn't necessary. Mrs. Fordham is speaking. We have 3 suitable candidates of the appropriate age, she says. Mary Hutchins, 14, strong constitution, experienced in laundry and basic domestic tasks. Ellen Porter, 13, good with needlework. What about that one? The man says. You press your ear as close to the gap as you can without actually lying on the floor. I beg your pardon? Mrs. Fordham's voice shifts a half tone. The girl in the hallway, through the glass there. Dark hair. A silence. You feel something happen to your breathing. That's Eliza Marsh, Mrs. Fordham says. She's 11. Is she? Another silence. Longer. We generally don't, Mrs. Fordham says. And then she stops. We generally don't. Not. We don't. Not. Absolutely not. Not. Get out of my institution and take your uncovered head with you. We generally don't. You press yourself back against the passage wall and you don't breathe, and you learn something in that moment that will shape every decision you make for the next 12 months. That the word generally is the most dangerous word in the English language. It means not always. It means there is a price. They don't take you that day. They take Mary. Mary comes to find you in the laundry before she leaves. She comes in without announcing herself and stands in the steam for a moment, looking at you with an expression you can't quite read, and then she says, Remember what I told you about the Deaconess house on Bermondsey Street? I remember. If something happens, you go there. Nothing's going to... Eliza. She says your name in a way that closes the sentence. If something happens, you hold her look. I'll remember, you say. She nods. She goes. She's wearing the St. Agatha's grey dress and carrying a small parcel wrapped in newspaper that contains everything she owns, which is not much, because St. Agatha's doesn't encourage accumulation. The door to the laundry closes behind her. The copper vat steams. Your hands resume their work. Let me tell you about Victorian London's hidden architecture, because without it this story doesn't make sense. By 1885, London is the largest city in the world. 4 million people. 4 million people in a city that was built for maybe 1.5 million and has never quite caught up with the overflow. Streets laid down in the medieval period, now choked with cabs and omnibuses and costermongers' carts and the constant, aggressive commerce of a city that has decided to be the centre of everything and is paying the price of that ambition in congestion and sewage and poverty visible enough to make comfortable people cross the street. The Thames runs through the middle of it, wide and grey and smelling considerably better than it did in 1858. The Great Stink, they called it, when the summer was so hot and the sewage so thick that Parliament had to evacuate, and Joseph Bazalgette got the contract to build the sewage system that now runs under your feet. A Victorian miracle of engineering that handles the waste of 3 million people and deposits it further downstream, which is progress, even if it doesn't solve everything. There are new things in London in 1885. The Underground Railway, the Metropolitan Line and the District Line already running, steam engines pulling carriages through tunnels under the streets, a concept so alarming that when it opened in 1863 some people refused to believe it was safe and others refused to believe it was dignified. Electric lighting in some of the grand buildings on the Strand, telephone wires starting to appear, the sense that the century is moving faster than anyone planned for. And then the poor, always the poor. Charles Booth is starting his great survey of London poverty right now. In 1885, his maps, the ones where he colour-codes streets by their economic condition, blue for destitution, black for the lowest class, criminal and semi-criminal, won't be published for a few more years. But the poverty he's mapping isn't new. It's just being seen. Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, Southwark, Lambeth, where St. Agatha's sits. Areas where families live 6 to a room, sometimes more. Where children grow up sleeping 4 to a bed, not for warmth, but because there isn't another bed. Where a woman widowed by an industrial accident might have 3 children under 6 and exactly one option, which is also a choice that is not really a choice. The official solution to this poverty, the Victorian solution, the one with the most bureaucratic weight behind it, was the poor law system, workhouses, institutions. The principle, expressed with a clarity that is almost admirable in its confidence, that poverty should be uncomfortable enough that people would prefer any alternative. They built these institutions all over London, and they filled them with children. 30,000 children in poor law institutions in England and Wales in the 1880s. 30,000 children living inside a system that meant extremely well and did extremely poorly, that was run by people who genuinely believed they were helping, that produced, as one of its perfectly natural outputs, a supply of children, physically available, legally manageable, socially invisible, of exactly the kind that a certain market was always looking for. I want to be very specific about this market and how it worked, because the history of Victorian child exploitation is often told as a story about monsters, individual bad men, villains, and yes, there were villains. But the more important story, the harder one, is the story of the system that wasn't designed to do evil, The system that did it anyway, efficiently and continuously, because it was constructed in a way that made evil easy and accountability difficult. The system had names for everything: placement, domestic service, charitable employment, moral reclamation. The language was so thoroughly good that it functioned as camouflage. And Eliza Marsh, aged 11, sleeping in dormitory 3 at St. Agatha's Home for Destitute Girls, Lambeth. She's right at the beginning of this system's throat. The weeks after Mary leaves pass in the usual rhythm. 5:30. Grey light, cold basin, oats or ghost of oats. Morning prayers, where you stand with 31 other girls and recite the Lord's Prayer in the particular flat, uninflected, perfectly synchronized manner that comes from having recited it 6,000 times. Work, lunch, potatoes, sometimes with something grey alongside them that might be meat or might be a memory of meat. Work, evening prayers, supper, bread again, sometimes with dripping. Bed. The laundry runs from 7 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. In the laundry, the heat is extraordinary. The copper vat generates a steam cloud that fills the room and soaks your dress through and makes your hair curl around your face in tendrils that Mrs. Grindle objects to because they look disorderly. The disorderedness of your hair, Mrs. Grindle has made clear, is a moral failing. You do not point out that your hair curls because of the steam, and the steam exists because of the laundry, and the laundry exists because of St. Agatha's, which is to say, the disorderedness of your hair is, in the final analysis, Mrs. Grindle's fault. You do not point this out because you are 11, and you have very good instincts about when to be quiet. Your hands, by November, are in a state that you have stopped being able to look at directly. The cracks at your knuckles have deepened into proper splits, white-edged, occasionally bleeding. The laundry soap, strong lye soap, the industrial kind that strips grease and also, incidentally, a layer of skin, has left your palms rough as pumice. When you press your fingers together hard, there is a familiar sting that has become a kind of marker, the way you might mark the passing of time on a wall. You press them together every morning when you wake up. Still here, still real, still you. You begin to notice things more carefully after Mary leaves. You'd always paid attention. St. Agatha's is a place where attention is survival. But after Mary's selection, you begin to attend to a different category of things. Not the daily rhythms, not the food and the work and the hierarchy of governesses. Something else. You start watching the visiting days. There are 4 types of visitors who come to St. Agatha's, and learning to distinguish them feels suddenly important. The first type, genuine philanthropists. Ladies and gentlemen of means who have taken on charitable work as a calling, who sit with girls in the receiving room and ask about their reading and give them small pamphlets about Christian virtue and leave donations in the book at the door. These people are earnest and sometimes slightly condescending and nearly always sincere. They see what they want to see, which is poor but salvageable children who will be improved by their attention, and they look away from the parts of St. Agatha's that resist this interpretation. The second type, employment agents, men and women who represent households in need of domestic staff. They're businesslike and specific. They come in with requirements, age, physical condition, any particular skills, and they leave with a signed form and a girl walking behind them. Most of what they do is legitimate. A significant portion of it is not. The difference is often impossible to determine from the outside, and Mrs. Fordham has decided not to try particularly hard. The third type, representatives of organisations, the Salvation Army comes, various mission societies come. Some of these are genuinely good and will take girls to actual safe houses where actual safe things happen. Some are covers. The language they use is identical. The buildings they take girls to look identical from the outside. The difference is on the inside after the door closes. The fourth type is harder to name. These are people who have no official reason to be at St. Agatha's. They don't represent households. They don't come with employment forms. They come with something more informal, a letter of introduction sometimes, or simply the confidence of someone who has come to such places before and found that confidence is sufficient. They speak to Mrs. Fordham quietly, privately, in the small office off the receiving room rather than in the receiving room itself. These visitors, you have noticed, are never written in the visitor's book. You know about the visitor's book because on Tuesday afternoons you clean the receiving room, and the visitor's book sits on the table near the door, and you clean around it, and you read what's written in it, because you have been able to read since you were 7, and no one at St. Agatha's has ever considered this a problem worth addressing. The entries are orderly: date, visitor name, organisation, purpose of visit, name of girl selected if applicable, clean, legible, official. The fourth type of visitor is never in there, which means they exist in the books that you can't see, the private ledgers, the ones Mrs. Fordham keeps in the locked drawer of her desk in the office, which you also clean but do not have access to, because the key is on a chain around her neck, and she takes it with her, even to morning prayers. In December, it snows. This is relevant not as atmosphere, but as economics, which is how everything at St. Agatha's is relevant. Snow means ice on the courtyard stones, which means 2 girls slip, and one of them badly enough that she can't work the laundry for a week, which means the laundry work is redistributed to the remaining girls, which means your Tuesday afternoon is now Tuesday afternoon plus Wednesday morning, plus an hour Thursday evening, and you are now doing the work of 1.5 people for the same ration of ghost oats. Your knuckles crack open properly in December. The lye soap in the wounds produces a sensation, like someone has poured hot liquid directly into your hands. You learn, through trial and error, to wrap them in strips torn from the hem of your undershirt before plunging them into the wash water. This helps slightly. Mrs. Grindle notices the strips and asks about them. You say you were cold. She accepts this because it is partly true. The cold at St. Agatha's in December is the kind that lives in the walls. The dormitory has a fireplace, one fireplace, at the far end of the room for 32 girls, and it burns from 9 in the evening until the coal runs out, which is usually sometime around midnight, after which the room goes back to its natural temperature, which in December feels approximately equivalent to outside. You share a bed with Agnes Croft. This is normal. Most girls at St. Agatha's share beds. Not enough beds, never enough beds, and anyway, warmth. You learn each other's sleeping patterns the way you learn geography, the specific topography of another person's nighttime self. Agnes curls inward, always, like she's protecting something. She breathes quietly. She sometimes cries in her sleep, silently, the kind of crying that's so practiced it doesn't even fully wake her. You never mention it in the morning. She never mentions the fact that you sometimes press your cracked knuckles against the wall beside the bed and count the seconds of pain like you're measuring something. This is a form of friendship, not one you'd find in the philanthropist pamphlets, but real. January. The New Year arrives at St. Agatha's with the particular ceremony that institutions afford significant dates. None whatsoever. The 1st of January is a work day. Morning prayers acknowledge the occasion with an additional psalm. Then, laundry. In January a new governess arrives. Her name is Miss Parton. She is young, 23, 24, not much more, and she has the specific expression of someone who has recently decided that charitable work is her calling and has not yet encountered the reality of that calling in any detail. Her hair is always neat. Her dress is always pressed. She looks at the girls with an attention that is different from the other governess's attention, less supervisory, more curious, as if she's trying to see you. Most of the governesses at St. Agatha's have stopped seeing the girls, not out of cruelty, not primarily, but out of the same self-defense mechanism that all people in difficult institutions eventually develop. The decision to process their charges as categories rather than individuals, because categories don't make you sad and individuals do. Miss Parton hasn't developed this yet. She notices your hands. "What happened?" she asks one morning in the laundry passage, looking at your wrapped knuckles with an expression that Mrs. Grindle would describe as excessive sympathy. "Laundry," you say. "Every day?" "Every day." She presses her lips together. You can see her decide something and then undecide it and then decide it again. "There's calendula salve in the first aid kit," she says. "I'll leave it where you can find it." She does. It helps. This is the kind of small, low-stakes mercy that St. Agatha's occasionally produces, almost by accident. A governess who still sees. Calendula salve. A strip of clean cloth. It doesn't change anything structural, but it means something. In February, you find out about W.T. Stead. Not directly, not yet. You find out in the way that information moves through institutions that are closed to the outside world, sideways, in fragments, through the medium of women who clean things. The women who come to clean St. Agatha's on Mondays and Fridays are not inmates. They're women from the surrounding streets, Lambeth women, working women, the sort of women who take cleaning work wherever they can find it, and who treat institutions like St. Agatha's with a particular combination of pity and pragmatism that is distinctly different from the way the governors treat it. They talk. Not to the girls, generally, but to each other. And in a place where the walls are as thin as St. Agatha's, and where the girls are as practised at listening as St. Agatha's girls are, this amounts to the same thing. You are mopping the back passage when you catch the tail end of a conversation between two of the Monday cleaners, Mrs. Beale, who has a red face and enormous forearms and moves through the world with the confidence of someone who has decided not to be embarrassed by anything, and a younger woman whose name you've never learned, who follows Mrs. Beale around like she's apprenticed to her general attitude. "That journalist fellow," Mrs. Beale is saying, "you're Stead from the Pall Mall." "I heard," the younger woman says, "going around asking questions about girls, about where they come from and where they go." A pause, the sound of a mop hitting a bucket. "About these sorts of places," Mrs. Beale says. Another pause. "About time," the younger woman says. They don't say anything else on the subject. You listen for more and there isn't more, but you tuck the name, away with the care of someone storing a seed for later planting. Stead, Pall Mall, journalist, asking about girls, about where they come from and where they go. March comes cold and specific. Specific because this is when the notice goes up. Not a literal notice on a literal notice board. St. Agatha's is not the sort of institution to be that direct about its own operations. The notice is a shift in behaviour. Mrs. Fordham begins to move through the institution with a slightly heightened attention, the way a person who is expecting company moves through their house. She inspects the dormitories more carefully. She questions the girls more thoroughly at morning inspection. Are you eating? Are you healthy? Do you have any sores? The sores question is interesting. The healthy body question is interesting. Mary Hutchins, who's been here long enough to understand these cycles, always used to say, when they check the merchandise, a sale is coming. Mary isn't here anymore. You have absorbed her understanding. The sale is coming. You're 12 now. Your birthday was in February. At St. Agatha's, birthdays are acknowledged by a slightly larger portion of porridge. Real porridge, not the ghost. And a prayer from Mrs. Fordham that contains your name and the phrase, "May she grow in grace and usefulness." This is the entirety of the birthday ceremony. You have had it 5 times now. The larger portion of porridge gets slightly easier to be grateful for each year, because hunger is consistent and pride is expensive. At 12, you are tall for your age. This is noted in your records. You know it's noted in your records because Miss Parton accidentally left the record book open on the governess table one afternoon, and you read it in the 30 seconds between her leaving the room and coming back, with the speed and retention of someone who has been reading things quickly and secretly for years. Eliza Marsh, age 12, height 4 feet 7 inches, health generally good, recurring chapping of hands due to laundry work. Disposition, quiet, observant, capable, reads well above her station. Recommended for domestic service, light instruction, possible charity school candidacy. The last line is different from the others. Most records end with domestic service. The possible charity school candidacy is Miss Parton's addition. You can tell from the ink, different from Mrs. Fordham's regular entries, slightly bluer. Miss Parton has been here 2 months and has already decided that sending you into service would be a waste. Mrs. Fordham has crossed it out, not fully crossed out, a single line through it, firm but not savage. Possible charity school candidacy, gone. But the words are still legible under the line, the way things at St. Agatha's remain visible after they've been cancelled. He comes on a Tuesday in March, the man who keeps his hat on. You don't see him arrive. You're in the laundry, and the laundry windows look onto the inner courtyard, not the street. But you hear the bell at the front door, and you hear the pattern of footsteps that follows. The solid, unhurried steps of someone who knows where he's going and has been going there regularly, and you feel the change in the institution's atmosphere that comes when certain visitors arrive. Not the philanthropist's visits, which produce a kind of brittle tidiness. Not the employment agent's visits, which produce efficiency. This is something quieter, a held breath, a slight increase in the institutional stillness, as if St. Agatha's itself is deciding not to call attention to what's happening. You leave the laundry. This is not permitted. You will be in significant trouble if you're caught. You make the calculation. Trouble is recoverable. Certain other things are not. The passage to the back of the receiving room is 12 steps from the laundry door. You walk them softly, the way you've walked many things at St. Agatha's, with the particular economy of movement you've developed over years of not wanting to be noticed. No sudden gestures, no sound from your footsteps, your breathing shallow and controlled. You're not thinking about this as you move. You have practiced it into instinct. You reach the bricked-over doorway and crouch at the gap. Mrs. Fordham's voice. I've told you before. I can't simply... His voice, the man with the hat. £3. A silence. Mr. Collett. £3 now and 2 when she's settled. You know my establishment is well regarded. The girl will be looked after. She's 12. That's hardly. I have a reputation to maintain, and a funding shortfall to navigate, I believe. His voice doesn't change. The same flat, reasonable tone throughout. The tone of someone who has had this conversation before and knows exactly which moment it turns. The Lambeth vestry reduced your charitable allocation last quarter. I read it in the parish records. The fire in the receiving room crackles. I'll need to know the nature of the establishment, Mrs. Fordham says. Her voice has changed. The resistance is still there, but it's changed shape. The way ice changes shape when it begins to melt. Still present, but different. A private house. Highly respectable. The girl would be a domestic helper initially. Initially. That word sits in your chest like a stone. And well provided for. Clean room, meals, a small wage, better than she'll see here. A longer pause. The Marsh girl, Mrs. Fordham says. That's the one. She's observant, reads. That's fine. I want it noted in the ledger as a proper domestic placement. Naturally. You sit with your back against the wall in the passage and you listen to the price of yourself being negotiated. And you are 12 years old, and you already know that this is the world, and you are already thinking about Mary Hutchins' last words to you, the ones she said in the steam of the laundry. If something happens, you go to Bermondsey Street. You have 3 days. You know this because you hear Mrs. Fordham tell Miss Parton at the end of the day, in the office, you are in the passage outside, having carried laundry to the door, that the Marsh girl will be placed at the end of the week. Miss Parton says, with whom? Mrs. Fordham gives an establishment name. You don't catch the address. Miss Parton says, that's not a household I recognise. Mrs. Fordham says, it's perfectly respectable. The silence that follows this statement has the texture of something that will not be argued with. I see, Miss Parton says. She doesn't say anything else. That evening, though, she presses something into your hand as she passes in the dormitory corridor. Small, folded. You open it later, under the blanket with Agnes asleep beside you, using the moonlight from the tiny window, a piece of paper, on it, in Miss Parton's neat hand. Deaconess House, 14 Bermondsey Street. Sister Agnes. Ask for Sister Agnes specifically. Go before Thursday. Below that, a smaller note. I cannot do more than this. I'm sorry. You fold the paper very small and press it into the seam of your undershirt. Mary told you. Miss Parton is telling you. 2 different people from 2 different parts of the system, pointing at the same address. You think about what that means. About how many girls must have stood in similar passages, must have heard similar negotiations through similar walls, and found no one who knew the address on Bermondsey Street, or found someone who told them but too late. You think about how many girls there must be who nobody told. You leave on Wednesday morning, not with permission, not with a signed form, not through the front door. The loose board in the back fence of St. Agatha's courtyard has been loose since, as far as you can determine forever. The courtyard is used for laundry drying in the summer and for supervised exercise in the spring and autumn, and neither of these activities involves examining the fence particularly closely. The board shifts to the left and leaves a gap about 14 inches wide, which is enough for a 12-year-old girl with no possessions beyond what she's wearing. It's 6:15 in the morning. The laundry shift begins at 7. The 23 minutes between these 2 facts is your window. You don't say goodbye to Agnes. You almost do. You almost go to her bed in the dormitory before the bell, touch her shoulder, say something. But you don't. Because if you say goodbye, you'll have to explain why. And if she asks you to stay, you don't entirely trust yourself not to. And anyway, there are 32 girls in that dormitory, and you can't take all of them through the gap in the fence, and you can't explain why you're going and she's not. Because the answer to that is a sentence with a shape too terrible to put into words at 6 in the morning in a cold dormitory where everyone is still asleep. You go. The courtyard is grey and cold, the March air sharp with the smell of the river 2 streets distant. The stones underfoot are slick with overnight frost, and you walk carefully, placing each foot with deliberate calm, not rushing, because running attracts attention, and calm doesn't. The board shifts, you step through. You're on a Lambeth street for the first time in 5 years, and the city is both smaller and larger than you remember, and your heart is hammering with a ferocity that seems out of proportion to the distance between the fence and the pavement. And you're 12 years old and completely alone, and you have a name and an address folded into your undershirt seam. And that is the whole of your plan. You walk. Bermondsey Street is across the river. Across the river means the bridge, and the bridge means the Thames, and the Thames in early March at 6:30 in the morning means fog. The London fog of 1885 is different from the fog you might imagine. It is not the romantic fog of gaslit mystery, the kind depicted in popular engravings where everything is charmingly soft-edged. The real fog of Victorian London in winter and early spring is a product of 3 million people burning coal simultaneously in a city with insufficient wind to move the smoke along. It is the colour of a dirty yellow-brown. It tastes of sulphur and something else, something carbon-based and specific, the way a fire smells when it's dying. It sits on the city like a hand pressing down. You walk north from St. Agatha's toward the river. The streets of Lambeth are waking up around you, the particular waking up of a working-class neighbourhood that starts its day at the kind of hour that middle-class London is still asleep through. Costermongers with their barrows, men with delivery carts, women going to the market with baskets already over their arms despite the hour. A newspaper boy at the corner of the main road, shouting headlines you can't quite pass through the fog. Something about Parliament, something about Africa. The Empire is apparently having a complicated week. Nobody looks at you. This is initially alarming and then quickly not. You look like what you are, a girl in a grey dress going somewhere. In working London, this is such a common sight that it doesn't register. Thousands of girls are going somewhere at this hour. To market, to work, to service. You're simply one more girl going somewhere. The relief of being invisible is real and immediate and slightly complicated. You've spent 5 years inside an institution that watched you constantly, that tracked your whereabouts by rule and by habit, that had specific opinions about where you were and when. Now you're in a city of 4 million people, and nobody in it has any idea you exist. Both things are happening at once. You are free, and you are completely unprotected. These are the same fact. The Thames at Lambeth Bridge in the early morning fog smells of mud and fish and coal tar and something else, dark and organic, that you decide not to investigate. The bridge itself emerges from the fog as you approach it. A pedestrian bridge, iron, unglamorous, a working bridge for working people. You cross it. The river is invisible below you, too much fog, but you can hear it. The movement of water through the arch supports, the low particular gurgle of current against stone, and beneath it something else, something that you feel more than hear. The subterranean presence of a great deal of moving water in a narrow channel. The Thames here is contained, managed, pressed into service the way everything in London is pressed into service. But it remembers being wild. You can feel that in the way it moves against the bridge piers. On the north bank, Southwark unfolds in front of you. Bermondsey Street is approximately 15 minutes east if you know the way. You mostly know the way from Mary's description, which she gave you one afternoon in the laundry, with the careful detail of someone rehearsing an emergency route, along the river bank until you can smell the tanneries, which you will be able to smell before you can see them, because the Bermondsey tanneries are a fact of sensory geography that asserts itself from several streets away. Mary was right about the tanneries. The smell hits you at the corner of Tooley Street. It is the smell of hides being processed. An animal smell, heavy and wet. The smell of something that was once alive being rendered into something useful. The tanneries of Bermondsey have been here since the medieval period. They require large amounts of water, and the streams and marshy ground of Bermondsey provided it, and so they stayed, while the city grew up around them, and now they are a fact of the neighbourhood the way weather is a fact. Pervasive, unavoidable, ignored by the people who live here, and shocking to anyone who doesn't. You find Bermondsey Street. Number 14 is a narrow building with a dark blue door and a small brass plate beside it that reads, Sisters of the Common Life, Refuge and Employment. Below the main sign, a smaller and slightly newer piece of metal. All inquiries welcome. You stand outside it for a moment, in the morning fog, smelling of tanneries and coal smoke and 5 years of institutional laundry, and you breathe, and you press your cracked knuckles together once, still here, still real, still you, and you knock on the door. Sister Agnes is not a nun. This is the first thing she establishes, with a directness that you find immediately reassuring. We use the title because it communicates a certain kind of seriousness, she says, sitting across from you in a small, clean room that smells of beeswax and something cooking, something with onions in it, which is such a specific and domestic smell after the institutional carbolic of St. Agatha's that you have to look away for a moment. We're not affiliated with any formal religious order. We're affiliated with practical necessity. She is 50-ish, small, with grey hair coiled tightly at the base of her neck and eyes that have the particular quality of eyes that have seen a great deal and have decided to continue looking anyway. She doesn't ask you many questions. This, you will learn, is policy. The girls who come to Bermondsey Street have already answered enough questions. She asked your name, your age, where you'd come from, and whether you'd been hurt. When you said St. Agatha's, she wrote it down without changing expression, but the stillness with which she wrote it told you something. You left voluntarily, she says. It is not a question. Yes. Before a placement? Yes. Do you know what the placement was? You think about the man with the hat, about the word initially, about the £5. I think so, you say. She looks at you for a moment. Something in her expression that is neither pity nor approval, but possibly both at once. You were smart to come here, she says. You'd be surprised how many don't. Let me tell you about Bermondsey Street and the network it sat inside. Because this is the other Victorian story, the one that runs parallel to the pipeline, not despite it, but in direct response to it, built by people who had decided that the pipeline was going to stop. By 1885, there were women across London who'd been working for nearly 2 decades to address the conditions that produced the sort of thing that was almost done to Eliza Marsh, Josephine Butler. You need to know this name. Josephine Butler was the daughter of a Northumberland landowner who, in the 1860s, had an experience that altered the entire direction of her life. Her daughter fell from a balcony and died, and in her grief, Butler went looking for something to do with the parts of herself that the grief had opened. She found the women in Liverpool's workhouses. She found them in the lock hospitals, the ones that forcibly detained women suspected of prostitution for medical inspection under the Contagious Diseases Acts, acts that applied only to women, in a transaction that required two parties that punished only one. She found the pipeline. She spent the next 2 decades making it her business. Butler understood something that most reformers of her era got wrong. The problem was not the women. The problem was not even the individual men. The problem was the arrangement, the economic and legal and social arrangement that made certain women available for exploitation, because the alternative, destitution, starvation, the workhouse, was worse. The problem was, in the most precise sense of the word, structural. She wrote about it. She lectured about it. She petitioned Parliament about it, in an era when women could not vote and were not supposed to have opinions about things like this. She was described in the press as unwomanly, as mentally unbalanced, as an embarrassment to respectable society. She kept going. By 1885, the Contagious Diseases Acts have been suspended, largely through her campaign. The movement she's part of is shifting its attention to the age of consent, which, in England in 1885, is 13. 13. A girl of 13 can, under English law, legally consent to sexual activity with an adult man. This is not a loophole, it is the actual law. Parliament set it at 13 in 1875 as a concession to reformers who had been arguing against the previous limit, which was 12. 12, and then 13. And both times, Parliament had debates about it. Think about that for a moment. The reformers want it raised to 16. Parliament has refused twice. The bill keeps dying in committee, killed by men who apparently have opinions about this that they are willing to defend in public, in the chamber, in the printed record. And into this situation, in the summer of 1885, comes W.T. Stead. You're at Bermondsey Street when Stead's articles appear. You have been there for 3 months by July. 3 months that have been, in the precise and literal sense of the word, an education. Sister Agnes runs the Bermondsey House as a refuge first, and an employment agency second, the legitimate kind. She has connections, a network of households and workshops that she has personally vetted, whose employers she knows by name, whose treatment of young women she has independently assessed. Girls from Bermondsey Street go into domestic service in houses where the Stead references are checked and the conditions are confirmed, and Sister Agnes visits them in their first month and again at 3 months, and if anything is wrong she goes and gets them. This is not complicated. It is in fact extremely simple. It is simply what the St. Agatha system should have been and wasn't. You spend your first weeks at Bermondsey Street doing what you've always done, making yourself useful. The house runs with the organised energy of a small institution that has no margin for inefficiency. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, always more laundry, the care of the small vegetable garden at the back, the maintenance of the record books in which Sister Agnes keeps detailed notes on every girl who has passed through the house. She lets you help with the record books. This is significant. She does it because you are good with figures and neat with a pen, and because she is overworked and pragmatic, and because she has noticed that you read the books you're allowed near with the attention of someone who's been waiting for books to read. The record books are not particularly cheerful reading. They document in Sister Agnes's careful hand the cases that have come to the house and the cases that haven't, the girls they've reached and the girls they've been too late for, the placements that worked and the placements that turned out to be exactly what the language of charity had been designed to conceal. There are names in these books, dozens of names, hundreds of names, girls from workhouses across London and beyond, ages ranging from 9 to 17, routes they came by, which establishments they'd passed through, what had happened to them. Reading these records, you understand for the first time the full shape of the thing you almost went into. Not an isolated case, not a few bad actors, a network, a geography, an infrastructure as organised as any legitimate industry, using the same mechanisms, recruitment, transport, accommodation, profit, but with cargo that is not permitted to say no. You read these records and you feel something that isn't entirely grief and isn't entirely anger, but has elements of both, with something else underneath it, colder and more useful, the knowledge that this is a system, and systems can be changed, because systems are made by people, and people can be changed if you apply sufficient pressure at the correct points. You are 12 years old, and you have arrived at this conclusion through direct evidence. The Pall Mall Gazette arrives at the Bermondsey Street house by 11 o'clock most mornings. On the 6th of July, 1885, it arrives with an article that takes up the entire front page and continues inside, under the headline, "The Report of Our Secret Commission." Sister Agnes reads it at the kitchen table while you're washing the breakfast things. You dry your hands. Carefully, the cracks have mostly healed in the 3 months of calendula salve and somewhat gentler work, but you still handle them carefully, a habit that has become permanent, and you come to stand beside her and read over her shoulder. W.T. Stead, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, has spent the previous months doing what the Monday cleaner Mrs. Beale described back in February, going around asking questions. He has documented the child prostitution trade in London in specific, named geographical detail. He has described the procurement process, the establishments, the prices, the networks. He has named streets. He has named the mechanism by which children are purchased from institutions. He has described what happens afterward. He has also, to demonstrate that the system exists and functions exactly as he describes, purchased a child himself. Rebecca Jarrett, a former brothel keeper turned Salvation Army worker, helped him do it. The child's name was Eliza Armstrong. She was 13. Her mother signed the papers. Her mother believed the money was for a domestic placement. It was not a domestic placement. Stead did not harm the child. He had her examined by a doctor to confirm her safety, and placed her with Bramwell Booth of the Salvation Army in France. But the purpose of the exercise was to demonstrate, with irrefutable directness, that the procurement was possible, that the paperwork held up, that the institutions and the system would facilitate it without question. He then published the entire account in a daily newspaper, all 4 parts of it, over 4 days, beginning today. The London reaction is immediate and remarkable. The news reaches the streets before noon. You go out to the market in the afternoon. Bermondsey Street runs on a budget that requires daily market shopping rather than weekly, buying what's cheapest when it's cheapest, and the articles are everywhere. People gathered around a man reading aloud on the corner, a woman with a stack of the Gazette selling copies faster than she can make change. Arguments on the pavement, real arguments. People raising their voices in that particular way that means the content of the argument matters to them personally. A woman ahead of you in the market queue is talking to the fishmonger with visible agitation. They've been doing it for years, everyone knows, and now it's in a newspaper and suddenly everyone's surprised. The fishmonger wraps her fish and says nothing. Another woman, older, with the flat vowels of someone who has lived in Southwark all her life. My neighbour's girl went into service 3 years back, never wrote, never came home. Was it? How would we know? We don't know. A pause. That's the point of it, isn't it? You don't know. You can't tell. You buy the vegetables and you walk back and the city feels different around you. Like something that was underground has broken the surface and is now obliged to be named. The public response to the Maiden Tribute articles is unlike anything London has seen in years. Within days, protest meetings are being organised. Within a week, Josephine Butler and Bramwell Booth and the National Vigilance Association are collecting signatures for a petition to Parliament, raise the age of consent to 16, pass the Criminal Law Amendment Act. The petition eventually collects 393,000 signatures, 393,000 names, collected in a matter of weeks by women going door to door with clipboards in neighbourhoods across London and beyond, explaining to women who wash floors and serve in shops and take in laundry that there is a law being discussed in Parliament that will either protect their daughters or fail to, and asking, which would you prefer? The answer, expressed 393,000 times, was unambiguous. Parliament, which had killed the bill twice before, passes it in August 1885. The Criminal Law Amendment Act raises the age of consent to 16. It also, for the first time, makes the procurement of underage girls for prostitution a criminal offence with real penalties. Stead is arrested and imprisoned for 3 months for purchasing Eliza Armstrong without her father's consent. The mother signed, but the father hadn't, and technically the father held the legal authority. And if you're wondering how a system that sold children, as a matter of course, managed to prosecute the journalist who exposed it on a procedural technicality, welcome to Victorian England. He serves the 3 months. He says it was worth it. Whether it was worth it is something that Eliza Armstrong herself might have an opinion about, and history has generally done a poor job of asking her. August. You're still at Bermondsey Street. Sister Agnes has, without ceremony or discussion, extended your stay beyond the initial 3 months, absorbing you into the work of the house in a way that is less charity and more collaboration. You're not paid. You're 12 and housed and fed, and this is apparently considered adequate. But you're genuinely useful, and this, in the post-Maiden Tribute chaos of 1885, matters. The house is receiving more girls than usual. The articles have done something double-edged, the way significant revelations often do. They've generated public outrage and legislative change, yes. But they've also created a moment of exposure that the pipeline's operators find threatening, and threatened pipelines sometimes accelerate rather than shut down, trying to complete transactions before attention becomes enforcement. In the weeks following the articles, Sister Agnes receives girls who've been moved quickly, girls who show up at the door in conditions that suggest they were moved in a hurry, girls whose paperwork is even less in order than usual. You help Sister Agnes document them. This has become your primary task. She has terrible handwriting, cramped and inconsistent, the product of left-handedness systematically suppressed in childhood, and you write clearly and fast. You sit beside her in the evenings when the house is quiet and the day's new arrivals have been settled, and you take down what she says: names, ages, origins, condition on arrival, condition now, placement plans. You are building a picture. The picture is not pleasant, but it is precise. And precision, you've come to understand, is one of the things that distinguishes a problem you can address from a problem that just exists. Sarah comes in September. She's brought by a woman from the Salvation Army, not one of the women you know, a newer recruit with the faintly dazed expression of someone who has recently expanded her understanding of what the city contains. She has Sarah by the hand, which Sarah permits with the particular stillness of a child who's been moved through too many hands to have strong opinions about the next one. Sarah is 9. She has been, in the careful language of Sister Agnes's records, in an unsuitable placement for approximately 6 weeks. Where she was before the placement? A workhouse in Hackney, where the workhouse sent her a private address in Pimlico that described itself as a boarding house for domestic staff. The 9 months you have spent paying attention to language has given you an automatic, involuntary decoding mechanism. Certain phrases now trigger an instant translation. Private boarding house for domestic staff. Not that. Highly respectable establishment. Not that. Well provided for. Not that. Suitable placement. Sometimes that. Sometimes not. You can often tell by the adjective. The more emphatically respectable the language, the less you trust it. Sarah doesn't speak much. She's not damaged in any way that's immediately physical. The Salvation Army woman confirmed this with the doctor before bringing her here, Sister Agnes's requirement. But she occupies a very small amount of space, as if she's practiced making herself minimal. She eats what's in front of her. She sleeps in the room at the back with 2 other girls currently in residence. She doesn't cry. She doesn't make demands. She sits near you sometimes while you're working on the records, not beside you exactly, at an angle, a 5-year-old safe distance, the geometry of someone who wants proximity without commitment. You let her be there. One afternoon she asks, "What are you writing?" "Names," you say. She thinks about this. "Are you writing my name?" "Not yet. Do you want me to?" She thinks some more. "Yes," she says. You write it. Sarah Hobbs, age 9, Hackney Workhouse, arrive September. She watches the ink dry with the complete attention of a child watching something that matters. October is when you learn the geography of the network more completely. Sister Agnes takes you with her on visits. This is unusual. She doesn't usually bring girls from the house on visits, but she's covering more ground now since the Maiden Tribute aftermath has increased both the number of cases and the number of organisations willing to coordinate. She's working with the National Vigilance Association, with a network of Salvation Army workers, with 2 women from the Women's Liberal Federation who've been inspired by the parliamentary vote and want to do something practical. She takes you because you can read maps. This is the reason she gives. It is also probably true. You suspect there is another reason. She is 53 years old and covers more ground in a week than most people manage in a month, and she is tired in a way she doesn't mention, but which you can see in the way she moves at the end of long days. Slower, more careful, like someone managing a vehicle with questionable steering. You carry the map book and you read the addresses and you take notes. You visit 3 other refuges in October, one in Bermondsey itself, run by a Miss Aitken who has the personal energy of a small steam engine and the organisational methods of someone who trusts their own mind but no one else's. One in Whitechapel, a Salvation Army establishment with a name that sounds like it could be a hymn, and a reality inside that is rather more practical than hymns. rows of beds, a meal schedule, a work programme that teaches sewing and laundry skills to girls who already know how to do both, but are being taught them officially, so the skill has a name and a certificate and therefore weight. And one in Clerkenwell. The Clerkenwell house is different. It's run by a woman named Mrs. Deverell, who was, before she was Mrs. Deverell and before she was running a refuge, in a placement of the sort that we're discussing. She's 32 years old. She has been running this house for 4 years. She has a quality of attention when she speaks to you specifically, not to Sister Agnes. That is like being read rather than being looked at. "How old are you?" she asks. 12. "And you came from St. Agatha's?" "Yes." "And now you're helping Agnes with the records?" "Yes." She looks at you for a long moment. "You're going to do something useful with your life," she says, not as encouragement, as observation. "I hope so," you say. "You will." A pause. "It won't be easy." "I know." She nods, as if you've confirmed something she was checking for. "Good. Most useful things aren't." November. The Criminal Law Amendment Act has been law for 3 months. Let me tell you what has changed in those 3 months and what hasn't. What has changed? The age of consent is 16. This is real. This matters. The law that existed before, the one that made a 13-year-old girl a legal adult in matters of sexual consent, no longer exists. This is not nothing. This is the result of Josephine Butler's decades of work and Stead's 3 months in prison and 393,000 signatures and women going door to door in the rain in October, explaining to strangers that this law affects their daughters. It is not nothing. What hasn't changed? The pipeline. And this is the hard part of the history, the part that sits heaviest. Because the law changed and the pipeline didn't. Not immediately, not automatically, not because the law wasn't real, but because the pipeline was older and deeper than any individual law, rooted in conditions. Poverty, destitution, the workhouse system, the poor laws, that a parliamentary act about consent doesn't touch. The institutions are still there. The agents are still there. The addresses are still there. What's changed is the sunlight, the Maiden Tribute, the petition, the act. These have forced the network into different configurations, more careful, less public. Some establishments have closed, some operators have moved, some have simply become more circumspect about documentation, better at the paperwork that makes an illegal transaction look legal. The girls are still going through. Sister Agnes receives them every week. She documents every one. December. You've been at Bermondsey Street for 9 months. Sister Agnes has enrolled you in an evening literacy and arithmetic class at the Mission Room on Long Lane, run by a Mr. and Mrs. Carver, who have the air of people who decided that education was the only intervention that had permanent effects, and have organised their entire lives around this conviction. You're the only student in the class who already reads well. This creates a slightly awkward dynamic for the first few sessions, quickly resolved when Mrs. Carver puts you to work helping the slower readers while she covers arithmetic with the others. You don't mind this. You've been doing variations of it since you arrived at Bermondsey Street, the teaching mode arriving naturally, something to do with the way you absorb information. You take it in through reading and thinking, and then it needs to come out through explaining. Otherwise it just sits there, getting heavier. In December, you finish the first full record book. Not Sister Agnes's first record book. She has many of them, going back to 1879, stored in a locked cabinet in the small office. Your first record book, the one you've been building since March, documenting the cases that have come to the house in 1885. You've documented 47 girls. 47 girls who came to Bermondsey Street in 1885 from workhouses and orphanages and private institutions across London. Their ages range from 9 to 16. Their origins are distributed across a map of London's charitable institutions that you now know better than most adults know their own neighbourhoods. St Agatha's, St Mary Magdalene's, the City of London Workhouse, Hackney Union, Whitechapel Union, Poplar Union, various private homes and missionary establishments. Their routes here vary. Some came via the Salvation Army, some via women like Miss Parton, low-level institutional workers who knew the address and passed it on, quietly, at risk of their own positions. Some came, as you came, alone, and on their own initiative, having been warned by a girl who came before them. Their outcomes vary too. 31 of the 47 are in verified legitimate placements now, or are still in residence and awaiting placement. Sister Agnes has their addresses, their employers' names, their references. She visits them. 11 have left Bermondsey Street for other refugees, other programmes, other cities. 5 are unaccounted for. You have put a star next to each of those 5 names. Not because you don't know what it means, you do, but because the record requires a mark, and a star is better than a cross, and you're still 12 years old, and there are some things you're not yet willing to make final. Christmas at Bermondsey Street is nothing like Christmas at St Agatha's. This is the first thing you notice, so it is worth saying directly. St Agatha's Christmas was a charity performance, an improved dinner, actual meat, real pudding, served by ladies from the Board of Governors who arrived in their good coats and served the food with the careful enthusiasm of people doing something meaningful. And there was singing of carols, and there was a small package for each girl containing a handkerchief and a tract about the Nativity. Christmas at Bermondsey Street is messier and louder and considerably more real. There are 12 girls in the house for Christmas. Sister Agnes has, through channels you don't entirely understand but respect deeply, obtained a goose. An actual goose. It is roasting in the kitchen from mid-morning, filling the house with a smell so dramatically unlike institutional carbolic that it takes several girls by surprise. You among them, standing in the kitchen doorway and simply breathing, with the specific overwhelm of someone who has been managing sensation carefully for too long and is suddenly confronted with something that requires no management at all, just presence. The goose smells of fat and sage and something sweetly caramelizing on the skin. Mrs. Deverell from the Clerkenwell house comes for dinner, and 2 women from the Whitechapel Salvation Army establishment, and Mr. and Mrs. Carver, and a woman named Miss Franklin who is a journalist, not for the Pall Mall, a smaller paper, and who has been documenting the post-Maiden Tribute legal changes for the past 5 months. The dinner table is not long enough for everyone. 2 smaller tables are pressed against it. You sit beside Sarah, who is still at the house because finding the right placement for a 9-year-old requires more care than usual, and Sister Agnes is being careful. Sarah has acquired, over 3 months of Bermondsey Street, a slightly less contracted way of occupying space. She sits in her chair at full chair width rather than the marginal fraction she used to permit herself. She still doesn't talk much, but she talks sometimes, and what she says tends to be accurate and unexpectedly funny, delivered with perfect timing and a face of complete seriousness. At the Christmas table she looks at the goose. "That's the best thing I've ever seen," she says. Several adults laugh. She turns to look at them with the expression of someone who finds this response baffling. "It is, though," she says. More laughter. She accepts this and returns her attention to the goose. After dinner, when the girls are asleep and the adults are gathered in the small front room with tea, and what Sister Agnes describes as a very modest amount of brandy, which turns out to be a not immodest amount of brandy given the size of the bottle and the number of people in the room, you listen to them talk. This is 1885 year end. The act is 3 months old. The atmosphere in the room is a combination of real achievement and clear-eyed realism about how far the work is from finished. Miss Franklin, the journalist, is talking about what she's found since the summer. The houses in Pimlico are still running. They've moved some operations north. There are addresses in Islington now that weren't there 6 months ago. The Act hasn't given us enforcement, Sister Agnes says. It's given us a legal tool. There's a difference. The Vigilance Association is pressing for more police action. The police have been pressing clients of these establishments for 20 years, Mrs. Deverell says, and the way she says it ends the optimistic reading of that sentence. That's what pressing means. A silence. The pipeline, Miss Franklin says, is the word we should use. It needs to become a public word, not the trade, not fallen women, not the social evil. Pipeline. Because pipeline means there's an upstream and a downstream. It means there are multiple points of intervention. It means the institutions that feed into it, the workhouses, the orphanages, the charitable homes, they're part of the story. St. Agatha's, you say. Everyone looks at you. You're sitting at the edge of the room, technically just passing through, technically on your way to bed. St. Agatha's is on the list, Sister Agnes says carefully. I know. I wrote the list. You look at Miss Franklin. If you want to write about the pipeline, you should write about the institutions, not just the addresses at the end, the addresses at the beginning. Miss Franklin looks at you for a moment. How old are you? 12. She looks at Sister Agnes. She's been keeping the record since March, Sister Agnes says. Miss Franklin reaches into her bag and produces a small notebook. What's the name of the matron at St. Agatha's? She asks. January 1886. You are 13 in February. In the meantime, you are still 12, which means that in legal terms you're still a year below the new age of consent, which means that the Act would apply to you if the Act were consistently enforced, which it is not, but which means you have been alive long enough to understand the distance between what a law says and what a law does in practice. The record book for 1885 sits on Sister Agnes's shelf, alongside 11 others, 12 books, spanning 1874 to 1885. 12 years of documentation. You spend a January afternoon with all 12 books on the table in front of you, cross-referencing. Which institutions appear most frequently as sources? Which addresses appear most frequently as destinations before the girls found their way to Bermondsey Street? Which names of agents recur? Mrs. Tremain's name appears in 4 different books. The man Mr. Collett's name appears in 6. St. Agatha's appears as a source institution in 31 cases across the 12 years. 31 girls from St. Agatha's who came to Bermondsey Street in 12 years. This represents, you calculate, a fraction of the total number of girls placed from St. Agatha's in the same period. The total number of placements in 12 years is something you can estimate from the visiting patterns and from what you observed in Mrs. Fordham's receiving room. Perhaps 150 placements, perhaps more. 31 of those 150 went wrong enough that the girls ended up here. The others, you don't know. This is the part of the record keeping that is hardest to sit with. The documented cases, the named girls. These you can hold. These you can act on, partially in small ways. The undocumented cases, the girls who went into placements and didn't find their way to Bermondsey Street or anywhere like it. These are a hole in the data that is also a hole in the world. You write this down in a new notebook you've started for your own use, separate from Sister Agnes's records. What we know is always less than what there is. Document everything you can. Assume more than you can see. February, your birthday. Sister Agnes gives you a book, a real book, not a pamphlet. It's a copy of Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor, the condensed single-volume edition, battered and well-read, with annotations in pencil from a previous owner. Because you should know what you're looking at, she says. You read it in 2 weeks, at night, in the small light of the room you now occupy alone, the back room, which became yours gradually by accretion, as it became clear that you needed somewhere to work in the evenings when the record books were open. Mayhew documented the working poor of London in the 1850s, street sellers and factory workers and mudlarks, the children who worked the Thames foreshore at low tide, collecting anything sellable from the mud. His documentation is exhaustive and uncomfortable in the way that true documentation always is. It names, it quantifies, it refuses the comfortable generalizations that let you look away. You read his interviews with the people he talked to, the verbatim transcriptions of voices from London's margins, and you think about the record books, about names and numbers, about the difference between a statistic and a person. There's a passage where Mayhew is talking to a young woman, 14, he thinks, maybe younger, who's been on the streets for 2 years. She describes her life with the directness that Mayhew seems to find both admirable and upsetting, and he keeps asking her if she wishes things were different, and she keeps answering the question he actually asked rather than the one he wanted to ask, which is, doesn't this hurt you? And her answers make clear that the more useful question is not whether it hurts, but what she's going to do next. You underline this passage. You don't know exactly why, but you do. March. 1 year since you came through the gap in St. Agatha's fence. You're taller. Your hands have healed properly. Your reading has expanded beyond anything St. Agatha's would have considered appropriate for a girl of your background, and has started to include things that would have made Mrs. Fordham give the same expression she gave when she crossed out Miss Parton's notation. Not angry, exactly, but specifically decided. Sarah leaves in March. This is the correct outcome. Sister Agnes has found her a position with a family in Peckham, a real family, the Hartleys, who have 3 daughters and want a 4th pair of hands, and whose home Sister Agnes has visited twice and confirmed as genuinely what it says it is. Mrs. Hartley's a school teacher. There is a library in the house. Sarah will be looked after. You know this. The knowledge doesn't make it easier to watch her go. She packs her things, more things than she arrived with, because Bermondsey Street gives its residents a proper bundle before they leave, a dress that fits them, a coat if they need one, a small amount of money, a letter from Sister Agnes to whoever they're going to. And she stands in the doorway of the back room and looks at you. "You're staying?" she asks. For now, she nods. "You'll write the names down," she says. "It's not a question." "I'll write the names down." "Good." She looks at the shelves with the record books. "Someone should." She goes. "Let me tell you about the London night. Not the romantic London night. Not the fog and the gaslight and the Holmesian atmosphere of mystery that the city has since been photographed into. The actual London night of 1885 to 1886, the night that the 4 million people of the city lived in, most of them without much choice about it. Gaslighting exists on the main streets. The lamplighters make their rounds at dusk, reaching up to light the gas jets in the iron lampposts that line the major thoroughfares, and in the circles of orange-yellow light they create, the city is navigable, even festive. The grand streets of the West End, Regent Street, Piccadilly, Oxford Street, these are properly lit, almost theatrical in their luminosity. Step off the main streets, step into Bermondsey, into Whitechapel, into the web of alleys and courts and back streets that make up the majority of London, and the light goes. The streets around Bermondsey Street are not lit. The side alleys are not lit. The courts and closes, the places where 4 or 5 families share a building meant for one, where the privies are in the courtyard and the water comes from a standpipe shared by 30 people. These are dark, genuinely dark. The dark of a room with no windows, of a place that has been decided, by the economics of Victorian municipal lighting, to be not worth illuminating. You learn the area around Bermondsey Street very precisely, in the way that you learn places when you navigate them in the dark. You learn it by texture as much as by sight. The slightly raised curb at the corner of the near alley, the place where a cobble is loose and catches your foot, the way the tannery smell intensifies near the waterway and lessens toward the main road. You are sent on errands in the evening sometimes, short errands, specific ones, to addresses within a few streets. Sister Agnes doesn't send you far alone, and she doesn't send you late, but sometimes not far, and not late still means navigating 2 blocks of unlit street, with the specific awareness of someone who knows that the dark is not neutral. The footsteps you hear behind you on a February evening are specific, not the random footfalls of someone also going somewhere. These footsteps have adjusted to your pace. When you slowed, they slowed. When you turned the corner, after a 2-second lag, they turned. You don't run. You have understood, with the same bodily intelligence that understands cracks and cold water, that running creates a particular dynamic, that the right response to being followed in the dark is not to become a thing that is running away from something. You walk to the nearest light. There is a gin shop on the corner of the main road. This is a gin shop neighbourhood, and you have learned its location because you are 12 and then 13, and because you understand the city's topology now, and its door is open to the cold night air, and there are people in it, and there is light in the doorway. You walk to the doorway and you stop. The footsteps behind you slow, pause, stop. You turn around. There is no one visible. The alley behind you is empty. You stand in the gin shop doorway for 3 minutes, listening, watching the darkness at the end of the alley. Nothing moves. A cat crosses the alley entrance from one invisible wall to another and disappears. After 3 minutes, you walk home. Your hands are steady. This surprises you slightly. That night, in the back room, you press your knuckles together, the familiar pressure, the small deliberate sensation. Your hands are not cracked anymore. The pressure produces a different feeling than it used to, more neutral, less sharp. You do it anyway. Still here, still real, still you. Spring 1886. You are 13 now. Old enough, under the old law, to have been legally consented into anything. Old enough, under the new law, to be specifically protected. The difference between these two things is real, and was not inevitable, and required enormous human effort to produce. You know this because you helped document some of that effort. Because the record books on Sister Agnes's shelf are a form of that effort. They are the evidence, the archive, the proof that the pipeline existed and continues to exist and needs to continue to be opposed. The reform movement in London in 1886 is in a particular phase that historians will later describe as consolidation. The legislative victory of the Act has been won. The public attention generated by the Maiden Tribute has subsided. Public attention always subsides. This is its nature. It is not a failing of the public so much as a property of attention itself. The hard, slow work of enforcement, of building a network of refuges, of changing the institutional practices of workhouses and orphanages, this work continues without the heat of crisis to drive it. This is, in some ways, the harder phase. Crisis is motivating. Maintenance is not. Sister Agnes maintains. Mrs. Deverell maintains. The Salvation Army maintains. Miss Franklin maintains. Writing her smaller articles in her smaller newspaper, building the evidentiary record that no one is currently paying attention to, but that will matter later. You maintain. You're 13 and you maintain the record books, and you attend the classes at the mission room, and you help navigate the arrivals at the house, and you spend Sunday afternoons reading in the back room, while the city does its complicated, layered, insufficient best to manage the consequences of 4 million people living on top of each other in a city built for considerably fewer. One Sunday, you walk, not for an errand, not for a specific purpose, just to walk. You go south, then east, then back up toward the river, through streets that you know differently than you knew them a year ago. A year ago, this map was an emergency route, a terrain of danger and possibility. Now it is a neighbourhood. You know the baker on Borough High Street who does the cheapest good bread in the area. You know the woman who sells hot potatoes at the corner in winter, gone now for the season. You know the boy who runs messages for 3 different businesses on Tooley Street, and who you nod to in passing, and who nods back. You are becoming part of this geography. It is, you think, what becoming part of a place feels like. Not a moment of arrival, but an accumulation of nodes, a slowly densifying web of known faces and known corners and known smells that eventually constitute something you can call home. Home is not what St. Agatha's was. Home is something you build rather than something that contains you. This is a thought you have on a Sunday afternoon in Southwark in the spring of 1886, and it is yours, and no one assigned it to you. Let me tell you something about the women in this story, not the girls, the women. Because here is the thing that tends to get left out of this history when it's told as a story about legislation. The legislation happened because women who had no right to vote, no formal political power, no presence in the parliamentary chamber where these decisions were made it happen anyway through the sheer, unglamorous, unromantic application of organised effort over decades. Josephine Butler started this work in the 1860s. She finished the first phase of it, the repeal of the Contagious Diseases Acts, in 1886. The same year, this is the year we're in, and she is not resting. She is 59 years old, and she is starting the next phase. The work she and the women around her are doing has a quality that I want to name precisely, because it tends to get mischaracterized in both directions, sometimes romanticized, as if it were heroic and dramatic, and sometimes diminished, as if it were merely administrative. It is neither. It is something more specific. It is the persistent application of rational attention to a problem that everyone around you is pretending not to see. It requires a tolerance for being dismissed, for being described as hysterical, as unwomanly, as not understanding the realities of the world. It requires continuing anyway, It requires documenting, which is unglamorous. It requires building networks, which is administrative. It requires confronting the specific language, the generally, the initially, the suitable placement that makes the thing possible and calling it what it is. This is, in the most precise and least dramatic terms I can find, an act of courage. And it is being done by women who are not in the parliamentary record, not in the histories, not in the commemorative engravings. It is being done in refuges in Bermondsey and Clerkenwell, in mission rooms in Whitechapel, in the records that a 13-year-old girl is keeping in a small book on a shelf, in a back room that smells of beeswax and cooking. Let me tell you what becomes of the people in this story. W.T. Stead serves 3 months in Holloway Prison and emerges to continue his journalism. He continues to advocate for social reform with the specific energy of someone who believes that journalism is a form of intervention. He dies in 1912 on the Titanic, on his way to a peace conference in New York. Josephine Butler continues her international campaign against child trafficking, what she begins to call the white slave trade, into the 1890s. She dies in 1906. She was right about almost everything and acknowledged for almost none of it in her lifetime. Rebecca Jarrett, the former brothel keeper who helped Stead purchase Eliza Armstrong to expose the pipeline, she is convicted and serves 6 months in prison alongside Stead. After her release, she works for the Salvation Army for decades. She dies in 1928 at 84. Eliza Armstrong, who was purchased by Stead for £5 to prove the pipeline existed. She's returned safely to England after her story becomes public and placed with a family. She grows up, she marries, she has children. She lives a life that is not this story, a life that is hers. Mrs. Fordham of St. Agatha's. The records are not clear. The institution receives scrutiny from the Vigilance Association in 1886. A formal inquiry finds no evidence of criminal conduct, in the way that formal inquiries in 1886 are structured to find no evidence of criminal conduct in institutions run by respectable persons. St. Agatha's continues to operate. The nature of its operations becomes gradually somewhat more accountable. Mary Hutchins. I don't know. The record doesn't say. She's in Sister Agnes's book as a case that Bermondsey Street tried to locate and couldn't. She's a star next to a name. Miss Parton, the governess who left the address in your undershirt seam. She leaves St. Agatha's the following year. Where she goes after is not in the record. What she did, the piece of paper, the name on it, the I cannot do more than this, is in the record. It is documented. It counted. Mr. Collett, the man who kept his hat on. There is a name matching his in a case file from the National Vigilance Association in 1887. The case is referred to the police. The police investigation produces no charges. This is also documented. Sister Agnes. She runs the Bermondsey Street house until 1901. She is 71 when she closes it. She lives until 1908. She leaves behind 18 record books. October 1886. You are still here. It has been 18 months since you came through the gap in St. Agatha's fence on a cold March morning with nothing but a name on a piece of paper and the accumulated intelligence of 5 years of paying attention. You're not the same person who came through that gap. You're also, in the essential ways, exactly that person. The attention is the same attention. The habit of pressing your knuckles together in the morning. Still here, still real, still you. This remains though the knuckles are smooth now, healed. The cracks of laundry work long resolved by time and calendula salve and work that doesn't eat your hands. The city has become yours in the way cities become yours, not by conquest but by familiarity, by the slow accretion of days that each add another thread to the web of you and it. You know the smell of the river at different tides, sulphurous and rich at low water, cleaner and more moving at high. You know the sound of the tanneries in the wind, how the smell travels east when the weather comes in from the west and you get a break from it. A day or two of almost clean air that you notice precisely because of its contrast. You know the sound of the Bermondsey night, the distant clatter from the borough market when a late delivery comes in, the periodic clank of barges on the river, the particular quiet of 2 a.m. when the gin shops have finally emptied out, and the streets belong briefly, tentatively, to nothing but darkness and cats. The back room at night is quiet. You are in bed, a real bed, a bed that you don't share with anyone, a small iron bed with a mattress that is not the finest but is yours. And the record books are on the shelf, and the beeswax is in the air, and outside the window the city is doing its complex nighttime business without requiring your attention. You close your eyes. The day runs back through you. The morning arrivals, the record keeping, the afternoon at the mission room, where you're now helping Mrs. Carver teach the younger students, which is a thing that has happened so naturally that it's difficult to identify the moment it became official. The evening visit to the Whitechapel house with Sister Agnes. The walk back through streets you know, in darkness you are not afraid of. A full day. Your hands are warm. They are fed and warm and unhurt, and they have done useful work today, and the work they've done will matter. Not enormously, not in the ways that get written into the parliamentary record, but in the ways that are written into Sister Agnes's books on the shelf, and into the 18 months of records you've kept, and into the lives of the 47 girls who passed through this house in 1885, and the 31 so far in 1886. Sarah is in Peckham. She is well. Mrs. Hartley writes regularly. Mary Hutchins is somewhere in the city, in a life you cannot see. You've not stopped hoping. Outside, a cart passes on the main road, distant. The sound of horse hooves on cobblestones coming through 2 walls and a street. The sound fades. A church bell somewhere. 11. Then, from a different direction, another church bell slightly out of sync. The city has so many churches that the hours overlap. Different denominations counting the same minutes in different towers, the effect being that time in London has a kind of harmony rather than a single note. You listen to it. Here is what you know at 13 in October, in a city of 4 million. The pipeline is real. You knew it abstractly from the records, and you know it concretely from March of last year, from a gap in a fence, from a man in a hat, from the word initially. The pipeline is not inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. Things are built by people and can be dismantled by people if enough people decide to do the dismantling. The act is 3 years away from fully existing. Then it will exist for 30 years before it is tested and tested again. The network you are part of, Sister Agnes's network, Butler's network, the Salvation Army's network, the women going door to door with clipboards. This network is not enough. It is not sufficient. It does not catch everyone. The stars next to names in the record books are proof of this. It is also the only thing that does what it does, and it is better than nothing in the way that matters most. It is real. You are real. The work is real. The names in the books are real. Sleep comes toward you the way it always does when you've been working and thinking and moving through the world. Not suddenly, but gradually, the way the fog comes in off the river, softening the edges of things first, then the things themselves, until what you're left with is something less defined and more restful than waking thought. The city outside settles into its late-night frequency. The bells have counted 11, and the next hour is a long way away. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof and work that matters, and a record book on the shelf with your own handwriting in it, and girls who are well, who might not have been well if the house on Bermondsey Street did not exist, and if you had not come through a gap in a fence on a March morning and knocked on a dark blue door. That is enough. Think about all the people who have slept in cities like this one. Not the grand ones, not the historical figures who get statues. The others. The ones who kept records, who passed addresses along through seams of undershirts, who left calendula salve where someone could find it, who built networks out of nothing more than attention and refusal, and the specific stubbornness of people who have decided that a thing is wrong and that this fact matters. All of them, in their beds, in their various nights, in their various cities, pressing their knuckles together in the dark and counting themselves present, still here, still real, still them. London will change almost beyond recognition in the century to come. The workhouses will close, the poor laws will change, and then change again. The pipeline will not disappear. These things do not disappear. They change shape. They become new arrangements of old dynamics. They require constant watching and constant documentation, and each generation has to learn them anew. But the law will be better, and the networks will be larger, and the record books will be more complete. Some things will stay the same. The beeswax smell in a refuge at night, the sound of a city settling, the weight of a record book in the hand, the particular quality of attention that a person develops when they have decided to see things rather than look away from them, the way the river sounds at 2 a.m. when the gin shops have closed and the streets are quiet, and the city is briefly just a city, complicated and imperfect and full of people trying to do their best and often failing, and sometimes, in the accumulated weight of small persistent actions, succeeding. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took a girl named Eliza Marsh in a back room on Bermondsey Street in October of 1886, after a full day, after a full year, after everything. Let the sounds quiet. Let the record books rest on their shelves. Let your thoughts slow and soften and stop. You've earned this. The river is still moving outside. It has been moving for 1,000 years before tonight, and will move for 1,000 years after. The city breathes around you, imperfect, enormous, full of things that need doing and people doing them. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's just this, the dark, the warmth, the weight of a day that was real and mattered and is now finally done. Close your eyes. The bells are quiet. The city is quiet. Everything that needed to be written down has been written down. Good night.